Join me in the audio garden to cultivate our collective wisdom, nurture creativity, and spread love. My name is Martha Senator. Welcome to Listen and Be Heard. That's me, your gardener in perennial training, nurturing conversations and community, along with my fellow cultivator of culture, Tony Robles, the poet of the people, who spoke with poet Keali'i MacKenzie, winner of the 5th annual Backbone Press chapbook contest for his manuscript, The Manna of Salt. That's coming up in the first part of our hour. And after consideration of the time that I spend to tend the audio garden, I've decided to go back to offering just 1 hour instead of 2, so that I can cook it up just right and still have some time to join you at the table and enjoy the meal. So in the second part of this precious hour, flagrantly fragrant with poetry, we'll hear from Tony at a reading in Greensboro, North Carolina, where he spoke with Caroline Cottom about her memoir, Love Changes Things, about ending nuclear testing in the 60s and 70s by focusing on love. Imagine that. And we'll also hear from poet and editor Ross Wright. Let me say that again, Ross White, about EKGs and poetry and banned books. My name once again is Martha Senator. My co-host is Tony Robles, and I want to invite you into the garden to sit for a little while on the bench with me, and we'll see what people have to say, and maybe we'll play a little too. You can find us, as always, at listenandbeheard.net, and now also at WLBH.org for streaming radio.
A warm aloha and a warm welcome to Keali'i MacKenzie. Welcome to Listen and Be Heard.
Thank you so much for having me, Tony. It's wonderful to be here.
In the first poem of the book, you invoke the deity of Kane, which is the god, one of the gods of creation that indigenous Hawaiians, that's part of their deep structure. And you also invoke Kanaloa, that is honored. How do these deep benefits, deep beliefs influence you as a poet?
Oh, that's a great question. So I invoke Kane and Kanaloa, who, in traditional Hawaiian beliefs, they're often paired together. And there's stories of them traveling around the islands together. Kane oversees things like sunlight, fresh water, and he's associated with certain plants, certain animals, things like that. And Kanaloa represents more salt water and the octopus and those types of things. But they're known to travel together, and throughout the islands there'd be these freshwater springs that would be hidden, and Kanaloa could sense them, and he would then tell Kane, "You need to dig there." And he would dig with his digging stick, and water would come out, fresh water. They would take that water and they would make ava, or kava, as popularly known, which is a beverage that people joke it tastes like, mud, but it's got a very, very mild stimulant effect. But these two themselves, I was thinking they had to be integral to salt making, because the only way to make salt in Hawaii is through evaporation. So you have Panaloa, who is the salt water, the ocean, and Kane, who is the sunlight, and they have to interact together to
Mm,
create the salt. But you're asking like what these beliefs and what it means for me or even my poetry is that poetry is the tool I use to explore my relationship to culture, to belief, to practice. It's how I start to begin to better understand my relationship to
mm.
land and the deities that may represent that land.
Tell me if I'm mispronouncing this. Pa'akai
Yeah,
is
okay.
is salt, and the name of your collection is the mana of salt.
hmm hmm
How did you come up with that title?
So the title is borrowed from the poet and writer, Samoan poet and writer Sia Figel. In one of her poems, I think it's called To a Young Artist in Contemplation. There's a scene where, the speaker is at the edge of the ocean and they're like, wailing into the sea. And she said, the mana of salt will protect you. And mana is one of those, it's a Hawaiian word, but it's also like this like pan Polynesian word that can mean like power or
Mm,
spirit, like spiritual power. It can also mean like literal power, energy, things like that. So the thought of salt, power of salt being able to protect us. And so I'm
mm.
like, oh, so I write a couple of poems with that in the title. Like, this is going to be the title of the collection of the chapbook.
So it was a Samoan poet that gave you the
Oh yeah.
inspiration, and I guess it's a common that would be kind of a common cultural theme among people from the islands.
hmm
Um, in the collection, you paint a picture of salt that gives it real body and complexity, that it can cleanse one of the past.
hmm
It has a cleansing property, and it's also an anchor for purification. Um, what is just in your thoughts and in your mind, what is the antithesis, if any, from salt? Because salt is healing, and it's very
Yeah.
powerful. Is there an antithesis to salt?
The first thing that popped into my head was sugar. And I don't know, that's just like we're thinking of, like those culinary things.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we're trained to think the opposite of salty is sweet and vice versa.
Hmm.
Um, I'm saying sugar and then like I'm thinking of salt, and that might be some of it. I'm thinking like culinary cooking, things like that. But in terms of in terms of like, it depends on how we're thinking about it. If I'm thinking like in terms of like purification, ritual, things like that, then maybe the opposite of salt would be any type of negative thoughts, those or negative emotions, ill intent, ill will, that can get you out of your head and unground you from things. Where the salt, whether you're thinking of the taste of it or using it for the similar purpose, that will ground you. You know,
Mm,
so anything
yeah.
that ungrounds you might be the opposite of that.
Well, the other thing too is I would say is the intention, because if the
hmm
intention is to be ritual, let's say, right? That's one thing. But when food companies are using it to
Yeah,
addict you and
yeah.
and do that, then that might be the antithesis, where the use
Oh,
is not.
absolutely.
Yeah. So
hmm
yeah, I was thinking of that, like, because we do come up with this taste, that we're conditioned. I mean,
hmm
like being Filipino, right? I mean, it's like go to a Filipino house, and it's like preparation for the earthquake. Man, you got the Vienna sausage, you got the spam, you got
Yep, yep.
you got, and then you come up in Hawaii, right? You're at the Manapua
Same.
truck, eating the
hmm
fried noodles at the Manapua truck. You're going to Zippy's, and you're not even thinking about these
Oh.
different things, right? Um, do you see the effects of salt? Well, just kind of relates to the next question. Do you see the effects of salt on the body and on the land as being similar? I think you do have a poem in the collection where you talk about how there's the power of the salt to kind of erode. Um,
Oh
and
yeah.
if so, how can we learn to honor the land by examining our relationship with salt? And how does salt become a corrupting agent?
Mm.
I hope that isn't too much at one time.
And if it is, it's okay.
Okay.
We'll just take the conversation how it comes up.
Sure, sure.
Uh, you know, salt. I mean, you think about the way that salt can kind of like wear things down, you know, and living on islands that are, you're going to be humid. You can't buffer yourself from the salt air. Not
Hmm.
really, you know. So when you think about that, and then like the intake of salt in the body, the only thing that you can kind of do is try to have everything in some type of balance, you know, and that's hard. That's really
Yeah.
hard. You're talking about, conditioning yourself like with the food and everything. Um, I just was I've been back in Hawaii for about maybe a week or two, but I was visiting folks in Massachusetts.
Hmm.
And I remember going out to dinner, and I'm going out to dinner, you're in restaurants, and they're usually heavier with salt,
Hmm.
butter, fat,
Oh yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
But even there, I was like, this isn't as salty as back home. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not as salty. Like, oh, okay. So even though this is restaurant food, it doesn't have that. But but again, the idea of balance, I think, is where you get that to what you can learn. Because, I mean, the land may be buffeted by salt, but it still can produce, what it needs to survive for
Mm.
people and for people, for the environment, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And salt is still essential. Like, I don't think especially with mammals, we all need salt,
Yeah.
you know? So you can't not have any, you know? So the opposite isn't going to be to just eliminate it. You
Yeah.
can't, you know?
Well, you have a beautiful piece in the collection, something about the anthropologist looks at, these
Yeah, yeah.
things and how it's very, you kind of take it in a speculatory thing because,
Hmm.
while we do come from the ocean, where does that lead in terms of our memory? Do we even remember that when we breathe water? And um, but you mentioned Massachusetts. Shout out to the Worcester poet laureate
Oh,
Oliver de la
yes.
Paz.
Hmm.
Actually we interviewed him. He was on our program about a month and a half or so ago. Really beautiful guy.
Hmm.
Beautiful sonnets. Um, we interviewed Ron Rash, who is a poet and a novelist whose work is really centered in Western North Carolina. His people are from the
Hmm.
mountains here.
Hmm.
Just a lovely guy. And one of the observations that he made was that in one of his novels, one of his characters says one of the characters says that landscape is destiny. Now you lived in Worcester for a time, is that correct?
Yeah, about 3 years. Hmm.
Yeah, it was funny. We had this conversation, and he had this take on people from the islands. He says that with people from the islands, that there's more of an emphasis on civility and politeness because you can't really get away.
Mm.
It's like
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
have to. And I just wonder what the impact on the Micronesian community here is going from an island culture, living in
Hmm.
a mountain culture. Can you
Hmm.
talk about Worcester and what that was like, living in Massachusetts and
Yeah, yeah.
being from Hawaii? I
Hmm.
was curious.
Yeah, let me give you a little more context and backstory on that. And shout out to Oliver. I've never met him, but he teaches at College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, and I lived from 2007 to 2010 behind that college. So like literally I
Okay.
could see it at night, see the lights from the stadiums when they're in games and stuff like that. And one of my roommates, she adjuncted there for like a year or so. So
Mm,
there's all these wonderful little connections that are happening. My dad's from Oahu, from Kailua. My mother's from in northern Connecticut, like northern central Connecticut, like north of Hartford. And they met in the very early 70s in California.
okay.
And that's where they got married. And, eventually migrated eastward. My dad had a job in DC. He was there in the summer. He lasted 3 days. He's like, I can't do this. Don't like the job. It was something for the federal government, and then the
Okay.
humidity, the combination of the two. And he's like, we can't stay here. So they went north, and when they started a family in the 80s in Springfield, Massachusetts, I ended up in Worcester in my early 20s because what I tell people is, and this is mostly true, because of poetry.
Mm.
I got involved with spoken word, with slam poetry, and the
Yes.
Worcester Poetry Slam community and the poetry community there was very welcoming and open. And that I was like, when I moved out, I was like, that's where I'm going first. While at the same time being like, okay, I'm moving to Worcester, and in the back of my head, I'm like, but I want to get to Hawaii because that's where my people are, and that's where culture and history is happening for me and what's going on there. And I wanted to, in some way, shape, or form, be part of that. But being in Worcester it is a different experience. Being in Massachusetts is a different experience. You know, I, I'm not going to say people are cold up north, but they're a little more reserved. I'm living in Hawaii now for 13 years and going to Massachusetts again. I was like, oh, people on the street aren't going to make eye contact or necessarily that friendliness, that you were talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
If you say hello, people will, respond, but there is that difference in that more reservedness. Again, particularly for the Northeast and New England. I can't speak to other parts of like New York or further down. Limits, or how to watch out for sodium. My daily sodium count is 2,000 milligrams because filters. The kidney filters, mine, the only one, is weak. Salt makes blood pump at higher pressure. Pressure stresses filters. When filters break down, the kidney weakens, loses function, and I weaken. Too much salt leads to fear. Fear is normal, but fear is grounded. Too much salt leads to dialysis. Fear is of dialysis. The kidney doctor says we, meaning I, meaning the kidney, can be preserved. Slow down the weakening. Slow down the salt. Sodium is hidden, the doctor says. That instructs on how important it is to read labels. When I ask for guidance, I get pamphlets, stapled, photocopied with suggestions on how to limit or remove salt from my diet. My daily intake should be 2,000 milligrams of salt/sodium. Labels on food are my map. Detail the route to limits. But what is hidden is deadly. Can weaken the filters, so hydration is key to keeping balance. Blood tests are key to measuring or mapping health. Reading is key to survival, as in how much salt is in one slice of bread, or as my mind distorts, how much flavor. Sliced bread ranges 70 milligrams per slice to 230 per slice. My doctor doesn't tell me how the grocery store should be navigated, or how to cope with days I nearly break down in the grocery store because bread has too much salt, sauces have too much salt, the non-dairy milks have more salt than I'd expect, or my boo suggests something frozen, but one serving has 800 milligrams of sodium per serving, and how do I map this? How do I navigate a grocery store without crying? Food equals salt equals weakened kidney equals faulty filters equals dialysis equals death or transplant or without tears, which have salt breaking down. So labels are my map. Willpower and encouragement. Herbs and spices, vinegar and citrus are my salve. The long work of retraining taste buds. Oh, but oyster sauce. And hydration. How do I get through my grocery store? How do I not spiral? By mapping 2,000 milligrams, reminding myself of flavors beyond salty, that at this stage, water remains life. Salt is hidden, but not a sentence. I have not been sentenced. There is still health.
You had touched on the legacy of, before we started our conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You had talked about the legacy of colonization on the diets of indigenous people. Can you speak on that again? Can you speak on that, because that's really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Let me speak more for like Hawaii, the Pacific, not speak for them, but that's where my knowledge base is coming from. Is that our diets traditionally, customarily, um, oftentimes are very plant-based, very fresh, you know, and then protein would come from things like the fishing, from some hunting of like hogs, pigs, chickens, things like that. And Hawaiians were known in the Pacific for using salt to flavor their food, but not necessarily to the excess that we have today. And The way I understand it is that, a lot of these culinary traditions kind of remain fairly unchanged until you get the American presence following not so much the like 1898, which is the Spanish-American War. That's when Hawaii is annexed as part of the push to attack the Philippines
Yeah,
and to
yeah,
attack Spain.
yeah,
But more after that. So like you starting like around World War One, we look at the records and you start to see the importation of more canned foods from the American continent. But it really becomes World War Two that
yeah,
kind of like reshapes the diet and the taste. And you find similar stories in other parts of the Pacific, like it's World War II that does that. So the introduction of canned food is a way, I mean, it's shelf stable. Like you were mentioning, Vienna sausage,
yeah,
Spam, corned beef, things like that. They're shelf stable and relatively cheap, and you can feed your family. One of my friends is from the Marshall Islands on the other end of the Pacific, not the other end, but not another part of the Pacific, and she was relaying how, her uncle struggles with kidney disease, you
mm,
know, but he has a hard time giving up, things like the Spam and Vienna sausage. And he said, after the war, this was what we had, and it meant we were no longer starving. So it becomes ingrained that this is the taste of being full and no longer being under threat of starvation. So like the diets change and it's introduced, and then it's really hard to change that. And then you get sort of like the things like fast food,
yeah,
the
yeah,
introduction of standardized like fast food, things like that. And you create an economy too where working people can't necessarily uh, get to the healthier options, the fresher options, the less salty options, because you're working one, two jobs. You still want to feed your kids. It's going to be cheaper to get, either have something like Spam or Vienna sausage or, any type of fast food,
yeah,
especially if you don't have time. And those things are saltier, sweeter, filled with more fat. And
yeah,
part of the piece of why there can be all these health complications in terms of our diets and our, all that. And a little thing on my day job is working in health equity, and we often work on what we call social and cultural determinants of health, and like food is one of those, and access to it.
yeah.
So that informs how I think about it now.
What should we not forget? What should people take from the mana of salt?
Hmm. Oh, that I would say that memory, body, and stories, and maybe it's not as obvious, but also land, that they're all connected. That's what I would say. And that one element can impact and bring up all types of things.
Mm,
So salt, you know, we have it in our body, it's in the land, it's in the ocean, and it's connected to culture and religion. So like as a representative of all of that, these things are connected.
yeah, yeah. Um, and we're winding down with time. I wanted to get your take on one other thing too, because
Hmm.
um, there was a writer from Hawaii that I think he taught at Leeward. He's a novelist, short story writer named Gary Pak.
Oh yeah,
And he
Gary. Hmm.
wrote a collection called I think it was called The Watcher of Waipuna. He
Hmm.
did that
Hmm.
in the 90s, right? And an interesting thing he said is, when he and a colleague, let's say, would go to the mainland, right? Before they get off the plane, they would just say to each other, okay, we're Asian American now,
Yeah.
right? As opposed to local. Can you talk about the nuance of that? Because, that is
Hmm.
that is a different experience being API,
Hmm.
in Hawaii
Hmm.
as opposed to the mainland. What are maybe one or maybe even two nuances you see
Oh yeah.
with that?
So for people who are like me, and our listeners can't necessarily see me. Maybe if they're watching the interview, they can.
Hmm.
I'm very mixed. And that's common in Hawaii too. That you might look at someone, you might think you know what they are, but you're not always sure. So my background is Hawaiian, a lot of European, but mostly Irish, and then Chinese. And I'll say that from my experience being on the American continent, there's a question of, well, what are you, first off?
Hmm.
And it depends on who's looking and who's asking. Some white folks will just immediately like, oh no, you're white, and that's it. And I've seen other people of color in the room hear a white person say that, and they're like, that's not right. That's not right at all. And then, I have to kind of explain. But for it's interesting because folks who read more Asian, yeah, there's that switch, okay, Asian American on the continent, whereas back in Hawaii, it's more like, oh, we're local, you know.
Local, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and that'll include folks, and that's an expanding category, as you get folks from, say, like Samoa, from Micronesia. There's prejudice against Micronesians, but like, hopefully as time goes on, we'll be seeing incorporated the local, other Pacific Islanders, Asian folks. It becomes part of that more local identity that doesn't translate easily to something like Asian American. Um, and in terms of Hawaiian, Native Hawaiian, there's a lot of misunderstanding because people say, "Oh, if you're Hawaiian, you're just someone from Hawaii." That's not really true, because there's a Native people, indigenous people there, and we've in English we're called Hawaiian, and so that's what it refers to. So navigating that on the U.S. continent can be tricky, and where we fit into the story isn't always clear cut. So sometimes it's in the AAPI category, Asian American Pacific Islander. Other times it might be within broader indigenous category, but there's always overlap, and that to me that's a little more interesting, the nuances that exist there.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, yeah, like you, I'm of mixed, everything. I'm, Filipino, Black, and Irish.
Mhm.
And, oftentimes that's translated into Latino. So I do a reading or a reading. I usually, hey, bienvenidos a todos, which
And
is
that's
which is beautiful, man. Which is
so,
beautiful.
and where I grew up in Springfield, there's a large, actually, Western Massachusetts has a fairly large Puerto Rican population.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, oftentimes when I was walking in downtown Springfield, and even Worcester, someone would just start speaking to me in Spanish, and I'm like, oh, yo no hablo español. Yo soy hawaiano nativo. Like, huh? What? That
Yeah,
type of reaction.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and, I, and to me, that's a jumping off point. Like, hey, we have some commonalities. Puerto Rico's territory, a colony of the United States.
Hmm.
Hawaii's that. We both have to deal with the legacies of the Spanish-American War. So, like, these mixed messages or assumptions can hopefully lead to other conversations.
And there's such a rich history. I mean, when I was talking to Scott Kikawa,
Hmm.
who is a Bamboo Ridge, author and wrote Red Dirt, as well as another mystery. His stories really take place when Hawaii was a territory and
Oh yeah, the territorial period.
before statehood.
Hmm.
So he gets into that nuance of a very specific period of time. Again, this is a wonderful and really beautiful collection of poetry. It's the winner of
Oh,
the
thank you, Tony.
Backbone Press Chapbook Contest. I've often had relatives tell me, "Hey, Tony, why don't you grow a backbone?" Well, maybe they'll publish me someday. But again, this is the winner of the Backbone Press Chapbook Contest. This is called the Mana of Salt. I know a lot of us are dealing with salt issues on a health tip or on just the health level. But this gets into the complexity of salt. It gets into ritual. It gets into it gets into love, spirit, heart, and all those things that make us human on a deep structure and a deep level. And this was written with a lot of love, and I'm just thankful that I came across this when I did, Keali'i, for people that want to pick up the book or know more about your work, how do they go about doing that?
To pick up the book, the best thing to do right now is to get it directly from Backbone Press. So go to their website, say it's backbonepress.org. You can order it directly from there, and they'll send it to you. That's the best place to get it right now. And if you want to know more about me, I don't have a website yet. This is something I've been meaning to do for a while. My Instagram handle is Keali'i0529, and that's Kealii 0529. And that's my main social media presence. Twitter is special right now, and I have not engaged it for some time.
Yes, Twitter is special right now. Lots of things are special right now, in good ways and bad ways. Maybe as always, but I'm feeling the pain of the world today. I really am. The cries of children. Innocent children everywhere. The children are never to blame. No matter where they are or who they are, they're not the ones who got us into this mess. That's one thing I know for sure. You were listening to Keali'i MacKenzie in conversation with Tony Robles. This is WPVM LP 103.7 in Asheville, North Carolina. The show is Listen and Be Heard, and my name is Martha Senator. We're going to continue now with a poem, because all this talk about food and salt, it made me think about my poem, Eat. And I dug up a live version that was recorded in the Mojo Club in Hamburg, Germany, quite a while ago, back in the 1990s. But it talks about some of the same themes, so I thought it would be fun to play it. And after that, we will hear Tony speaking with Caroline Cottom and some of her poetry, followed by Ross White and some thoughts about banned books.
Eat. Eat your food, girl. You don't eat enough. Eat potatoes for potato hips. Eat squash, succotash, corned beef hash. Eat chicken cacciatore, cheese souffle, homemade peach cobbler. Eat apple pie, make some Pillsbury Doughboy biscuits. Skinny as you are, you could eat whatever you want. You could eat Triple Talks Fudge Delight, wouldn't make you fat. Mira, flaquita, you eating enough? Eat spaghetti bolognese, fettuccine alfredo, pasta con pesto, French onion soup, steak tartare, couscous, fufu. Eat avocados from Santo Domingo, pineapples from Hawaii, oranges from Florida, chocolate from the wrapper. Eat free-range chickens if you're worried about the chickens. Eat beef. Eat beef with AIDS. Eat beef and wear beef. Just eat more, girl. Down got it. You eat like a rabbit. There's nothing to you. What do you mean you're not hungry? You just asked for that food. Now eat it. Look in your refrigerator. Did you go to the supermarket today? Did you go to Hell's Kitchen, Houston Street, Chinatown? Did you go to the farmer's market? Did you buy from organic farmers? Did you pay for some food? 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 Did you carry it home? Did you pull it home? Did you push it home? Did you drag it home? Just eat raw food if you don't like to cook. Go to a restaurant, eat lamb, drink lassi on 6th Street. I don't know where they shop. Probably shop same place you do. What about bok choy, wonton soup, pork fried rice, sushi, McDonald's, KFC, Taco Bell's, Wendy's? You like Pizza Hut better? Rice and beans. Rice and beans is spring water. Spring water from upstate somewhere. They got spring water in prisons up there. Drink spring water if you don't like chlorine. Recycle the bottle. Anyway, you can eat all the nitrite-injected bacon you want. You got nothing to worry about. I wish I had your problem. You are nothing but an Evian drinking bunny. Why don't you drink some kale, celery, carrots laced with pesticide, munch on grapes from the California vines, talk about Republicans while you save the juice, be an elitist, pay more, buy organic vegetables. What are you gonna eat? 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 What are you going to eat? Pork skin, collard green, black eyed peas, smothered pork chops, lemon chicken, lamb cutlet, goose on Christmas. Throw the bones out with Christmas tree. Turkey on Thanksgiving. Argue about multicultural education. Get salmonella. Be thankful. Fish fish on Fridays. Fish on Fridays. Fish on Fridays. Don't eat pork if you don't want to. I respect that. Eat horse meat instead. Have it flown in freeze-dried from Paris. Flying some oranges from Spain. Try goat meat. Drink goat milk. Make goat milk cheese. Keep a goat in your backyard. Catch a pigeon and boil it for 2 weeks. Just eat your food, girl. You're nothing but skin and bones. I could wrap my finger around your wrist twice. No one's gonna see you at the beach. You need to grow some melons in that bra. Put some meat on your butt so you don't get tired sitting there. You need something to keep up those go-go boots. Your elbows are lethal weapons. What's the matter with you, girl? You need to eat food, girl. Just eat.
Okay, this is Tony Robles with Listen and Be Heard Radio. We are in Greensboro, North Carolina at a wonderful poetry reading. And we are here with Caroline Cottom, PhD. She's the author of several poetry books. But let me just say hello, Caroline. And one of the books you have is called Love Changes Things, Even in the World of Politics. How do you connect politics and poetry?
We just want to say this is actually a memoir, this book.
Mm-hmm.
This is about my work leading the coalition in Washington, D.C. to end nuclear testing in the U.S. And this was in the 1980s and 1990s. Mm-hmm. And the book is my experience of that, where it's a very strange story. I'll tell you, I felt like I was led by spirit to do it from a place of love. And so every time I wrote a congressman, made a phone call, made a visit, I just got this message in my head that said, hey, do this from a place of love. Get focused on love before you do it. And we ended nuclear testing. And this had something to do with it.
Well, love changes things. And, we do our art, our poetry, our work through love. How is, if anything, how is writing poetry different from memoir? And how are they similar?
I think actually memoir and poetry are pretty close among the different genres, literary genres, in that both of them call on you to be in touch with your feelings and less with your head and your thoughts to what does this feel to me? What does it mean to me? What is my experience of this? And both go in that direction. I wrote memoir and personal essay before I really got focused on poetry. I did write poetry a long time ago, but I came back to it through that because the memoir is like really going into your story, your experiences. And I know from your listening to your wonderful stories about your grandfather, for example, that there's those experiences stay with us and they resonate with our life in different ways. And so this experience of taking love into the realm of politics came from healing processes from my own life, where I got to the place where I could say, I need to be in a place of power. What can I do? And that's how I got to the memoir.
Ralph Ellison said once that geography, I think he said geography is destiny. Talk about Memphis and how Memphis figures into your life as a poet, as an activist.
So, I was born in Memphis. I spent a lot of my life in Nashville, but I'm a Tennessean at heart. Mm-hmm. I love North Carolina now that I'm here. I really do love North Carolina, but I spent a lot of my life there, and I felt called. My husband and I lived overseas for like 15 years, and I felt called to come back to that. And it's similar in ways. Tennessee used to be part of North Carolina historically. And so my ancestors came from North Carolina to Tennessee. That's for a lot of us whose families ended up in Tennessee. That's where they came from. And so the place has a lot to do, for me, has a lot to do with our experience in life. And I noticed it in your own poetry, writing about San Francisco. It's in our blood. It's in our cells, really. And this rural Tennessean experience of my mother as a sharecropper's daughter and my grandparents and my aunts and uncles is in me. It's not just something that I think about. It's in me. And so I resonate to it. And when I went back to where my mother grew up, I feel it, man. It's like, I can't not feel it. I feel it. I felt called to go back there. Ended up living there for a couple of years just because I had to be where that was happening, where that happened,
Again, this is Listen and Be Heard Radio. Tony Robles from Greensboro, North Carolina, speaking with Caroline Cottom, PhD. And Cottom is spelled Cottom, as in Mary. She has these wonderful books. It's a memoir called Love Changes Things. She also has a collection called The Isle of, what is this, Is? The Isle of Is, A Guide to Awakening. And also a book that she read from earlier today called Asylum on Main Street Rag Publishing. And if you're interested in getting Caroline's book, it's www.mainstreetrag.com. And again, Caroline, thank you for being with us and taking time to chat with Listen and Be Heard. If people want to get more familiar with your work, how would they go about doing that?
Best way is to go to my website. I have a website. It's www.Caroline, spelled like Caroline, Cottom, Cottom.com. That's it. So I'm going to read to you, this is Caroline Cottom, I'm going to read to you Cypress Left Standing, which is about the area where my mother grew up as a sharecropper's daughter. And it's the subhead is Lake County, Tennessee, the year 2000. My mother loved this lake, its shallows and throngs of snowy egrets. Reelfoot Lake, the compass my ancestors called home. I imagine a girlhood, family outings, sweet corn, fried chicken, red-checked cloths, but the images flicker in black and white. After earthquakes and Mississippi floods created the lake, loggers felled every tree whose roots were underwater. Cypresses still standing seem to whisper. Foxes and red-winged blackbirds sound out my name. I kneel at my mother's grave, feel her on the banks, in the fields, hear her in the muted wing beats of a great blue heron as egrets fill the trees with blossoms of lace.
Okay, this is Tony Robles at Listen and Be Heard Radio, and we are at the Auden Brewery in Greensboro, North Carolina, for a poetry series. And we're speaking with Ross White, who is one of the featured readers. How are you, Ross?
I'm doing great, Tony. Thrilled to have heard some of your poems today. It's a great day for poetry.
It sure is. And I wanted to ask you, one of the poems that you read had to do with having an EKG. This might be an odd question, but what are the similarities, if anything, between poetry and an EKG?
That is an odd question, but it's kind of a great one. I think part of it is that the EKG is essentially taking the feedback from our bodies and it's putting it into a visual form. Mm-hmm. And if I understand it correctly, my science is maybe not great. The EKG is supposed to have sort of a stable rhythm to it. And in many ways, that stable rhythm, that's the music of our bodies. And that music comes out so often in poems.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And I know because I've had a couple of EKGs myself, they put you on a treadmill. And I guess, if you look at it metaphorically, in our poetry, we don't want to be on a treadmill. We want to grow. We want to continue to find a broader range. Tell us about your books. I notice here on the table you have a few volumes of your work. Just tell us about some of the stuff you're doing, some of your books. I understand you're also an editor.
I am, yeah. And that's honestly where my heart is. I work with Bull City Press in Durham. We've published about 75 titles thus far, and my great joy is getting in kind of like a mechanic or an engineer into other people's poems. But in my own work, I mostly just try to find that music. It's funny you mentioned being on the treadmill because I so frequently associate that with exercise, and I'm a big believer that as poets we grow from that repetition, from getting those reps in and just doing the work, being on that treadmill, and eventually inspiration's going to strike, and we'll hopefully we've got the muscles ready to go so that we're ready when inspiration strikes to capture it in a way that's got real music and got real rigor to it.
How do you keep, kind of keep things tuned? Because I know, it's a solitary art, solitary thing that we do. Oftentimes our emotions, it's not like we're living in islands. We have that, we have other parts of our lives. And, how do you maintain just a healthy outlook and a healthy balance for your professional work and your personal work?
Well, I think one thing to realize is that even if you're not putting pen to paper, you're still writing. Every time you read, that's part of your writing process. Every time you go outside and take a walk, that's part of your writing process. And so I think, just kind of being purposeful about keeping current with that, and then trying to put pen to paper and do those exercises every so often, just so that when you have that moment where something deep is going on in your life, you're able to say, all right, let me sit down, let me take a few minutes and see if I can carve out something that's going to become the seed of a poem that I'll use down the road.
I noticed that over on the table where your books are, we have a person that has just taken one of your books, pulled out a few dollars. So, when you see that happen, how does that translate to your poetic EKG?
Well, it keeps the heart healthy to know that there are readers. Every couple of years, the Atlantic or the New York Times or somebody does that asinine article about, is poetry dead? Is poetry dying? Is poetry over? And the fact of the matter is, poetry is so healthy. There's so many readers and writers out there. I think it's maybe healthier than it's been in my lifetime right this minute. People are excited about poems, whether it's through spoken word, whether it's through Amanda Gorman's inaugural reading, whether it's through reading series like the one we're at today. Poetry's everywhere, and it's really exciting to have it in our lives.
One more question for you. There's been so much, talk about banning books, and
once it's heard, it can't be unheard. Once it's published, it's not going to be unpublished. Once you read the poem, you can't unread it. No matter how an individual may try to push it to the side, forget about it, it's still in there. And it's the words, the meaning, the feelings behind it are taking root in their psyche, and they can't get rid of it.
This book is gay by Juno Dawson.
Just those types of things going on across different school districts across the country. Just tell us about your feelings towards that and your perspective, because we really want to speak to authors and get their feelings on that.
I think we're in a sad state when we walk around thinking that we can't be exposed to uncomfortable ideas. I think that living with discomfort and talking through it and past it is part of the foundation of our democracy. And I think that something really dies when we're not willing to do that with each other. I think that we're looking at a time of increased polarization and divide. And it's because we want to retreat to these silos where we don't have to be exposed to anything that's different than what we believe. But I think how often in my own life, good things have come from, and great friendships even have come from, places where we started with uncomfortable conversations or very different beliefs. And I feel really fortunate that some of my great friendships are with people whose beliefs I don't always share, but we're able to interact on a deeply human level. And that's so much more enriching than taking a stand on an issue without ever listening and learning what other people believe about it.
Yeah. Again, this is WPVM Radio, Listen and Be Heard. Thank you so much for taking time to speak with us. Tell us, for listeners that are out there that want to purchase your book and find out more about your work, how they can go about doing that.
I'm online at rosswhite.com, and they can follow me on Mastodon at rosswhite at bullcity.space.
Rosswhite at bullcity.space.
Greed. is sympathetic to everyone, wears a sinister smile and gives out guns, roams many miles without a home, makes grotesque art of our hearts while hiding and biding time. We cry, children die, the train runs, chugging dividends to the very end. From its stack, what cars fall from the track. Doesn't need water, never looks back or ahead, doesn't see you, me, or the dead.
When I say ancestors use me, when I say ancestors use me, what I mean is I surrender. Surrender my life to you, to you, to you. Surrender.
If we understand disease with this new kind of diagnosis, the treatment options become radically different. Indeed, medicine we prescribe to address the inflammation of people and planet has been prescribed by others
Finished
before
that
us.
project with USDA, determined to bring the voice of American farmers and ranchers into discussions around what was happening on the ground and on the front lines of climate
In
change.
today's universities, farming and medicine are both taught through an ahistorical lens, which hides the legacies of land theft, genocide, and labor theft that their industries required to exist in these territories. The training is science-based, but selectively so, focusing on science that advances its agendas rather than interrogating its assumptions of power. Both farming and medicine had their education and policy shaped by philanthropic
But I like to
capitalism.
think about it as sobering. It's bringing to readers the experience from a farmer's perspective, from people who work the land, from people who actually their livelihood depends on dependable weather. And it's bringing that experience into the reality of all the rest of us who depend on these folks to feed us.
Bombara is an African-American writer, and actually she was an English teacher, if you didn't know, Crypto. She wrote in the 1960s with the Black Arts Movement and emergence of Black feminism.
Amazing author.
Well, and then even today, this piece feels so fresh.
There's also something about science that just doesn't get at the way it all feels. We see that people are taking facts, very true, very, very stark facts, and going, I can't deal with this.
When I say ancestors use me, what I mean is I surrender.
You've been in the Listen and Be Heard audio garden. My name is Martha Senator, and I'm your most humble gardener, along with Tony Robles who comes to you from Hendersonville, North Carolina. I come to you from Greenville, South Carolina, and I want to thank Davy and Dial in Asheville, North Carolina, for the opportunity to broadcast in Asheville and speak so intimately with the people who live in Asheville, who I'm getting to know, and I hope that they are also getting to know and appreciate what Listen and Be Heard is all about. We get help from DJ Jeannie Hopper, from musician Jay Rodriguez, from Davy and Dial, the station manager at WPVM. And also you heard the voice of Yvette Murray in our band book segment. She's the voice in our band book theme. And I've planted some seeds in the garden that should actually be sprouting in the wintertime. I'll be speaking again with Laura Langnick and Meredith Lee. Date still to be determined about another climate change special with Asheville's 2 local experts on regional foodways and resilient agriculture. Also, I'm going to get an interview done with Leslie Ann Brown, author of Black Girl on Mars. She's over there outside of Copenhagen in the country, and we've tried several times and have had different outcomes, none of them satisfactory yet, all of them technical issues, but we will overcome, and I will bring that conversation to you, hopefully next week, but we'll see what happens. And also in the mail, I've gotten Live from the Underground, a book about college radio from Catherine Rye Jewell. Thank you so much for joining me here. The sounds, the words. I hope a breath of fresh air while you've been strolling through the garden. Listen and Be Heard is launching a new project, streaming radio. Please come join us and help us get it all going. I'll tell you more about it all next week. But you can visit us there at WLBH.org. Till then, thank you for listening and the opportunity to be heard.